Well, hi kids, it's OldManLondre. Today, we're gonna be talking about drugs and how the left tends to eat their own, give them depression, and make them suicidal. And why we should probably stop that. If that sounds interesting to you, join me today. Oh shit, it was much more dramatic than I intended for it to be. About a year ago, a Mayo Clinic therapist officially diagnosed me with a severe psychological adjustment disorder, which is a mental disorder that is almost identical to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Specifically, I was diagnosed with what's called an other specified trauma and stressor-related disorder, which is a mouthful, which is why I usually refer to it as PTSD with an asterisk. Now, due to the fact that my traumas didn't involve bodily harm or sexual violence, I was not diagnosed specifically with PTSD, even though I've suffered from all of the torturous hallmark symptoms of PTSD consistently for several years now. So then the question, of course, is what happened to me? What's the story that led to me using these various substances to try to alleviate some of the worst symptoms of my depression and prevent me from killing myself? Well, here's the story. About 5 years ago, things were really good for me. Actually, they were great. I was 25 and I was named a finalist for Person of the Year by my local paper, the La Crosse Tribune. Then, less than a year later, while my wife and I took our 10-month-old daughter on a road trip from western Wisconsin to St. Louis, a seemingly random individual named June Carter, whom I have never met and who I would later find out had a serious criminal record spanning multiple states, had fabricated a slanderous story about me, falsely accusing me on Facebook of defrauding a grassroots fundraising effort I had started, like something out of a witch trial from the 1690s. The charges against me were read into the record through a public spectacle by way of viral Facebook post. It was authored and promoted by June Carter with the hashtag fraud charges for Landre's soup. June's post continued, encouraging this whole city of La Crosse to tell me to, quote, go fuck myself. Now, what crime did I commit according to June Carter? Well, according to June, whose real name we'll get to later, according to June, I had hustled La Crosse for over $25K. This suggestion, this claim is bullshit. Completely, utterly ridiculous and untrue. But the torches immediately were being lit and pitchforks were being sharpened. The likes and comments on the post began to pour in. It was getting shared all across town. And when this scumbag named June encouraged people to share the post that they had created far and wide, users happily obliged. Some even replied directly saying, "You got it," with the thumbs up. Other locals, by the way, appeared ready to take things much further, including one user named John, who appears to be a high school social studies teacher for the Holman School District. They replied to June's post saying, quote, "Tell me more, please. I need a weekend hacking project." I need a weekend hacking project. What the f does that mean? And does the Holman School District condone this? I've tried to get an answer from them, but they won't tell me. Most people in town, though, chose a more traditional Midwestern approach by first reading the troll's Facebook post and then just gossiping about it around town. And I'm sure this will shock just about everybody, but no one, not a single person, replied to June Carter's post asking where they were getting their information from. What kind of information do they have that would support this obviously bogus claim? And not a single person bothered to ask, wait, who are you anyway? No one in town goes by that name. Now, of course, as it turns out, if anyone had bothered to ask that last simple and obvious question, basically, who the f are you? they would have discovered that the account accusing me of being a fraudster was actually, ironically, you might call a fraudulent account.
Bruh.
Because it was a fake Facebook profile used to obscure the identity of the real owners and operators of the June Carter profile. It turns out that June Carter was actually owned by two people. First, a manager of a local tobacco store, and his significant other, who happens to be a very high-profile nonprofit executive director in town. Perhaps more ironically, though, turns out I was being labeled a criminal, which I'm not, nor have I ever been. I was being accused by someone who, unlike me, just for emphasis, unlike me, they actually have a criminal record, and a lengthy, serious one at that. But none of that mattered to the mob, and none of it apparently mattered to the press either. Because evidently the Tribune just couldn't resist what had been served up for them. This poo-poo platter was just perfect for their liking. Because the lowlifes at the Tribune and the shithead corporatists that run their parent company, Lee Enterprises, they don't care about journalistic rigor or properly scrutinizing the people who level insidious claims and accusations about people before they move forward with a story, because instead, it's just much easier to ignore your basic responsibilities as a journalist and as a publication.
I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
The sourcing here in this story and complete lack of editorial control tells me a great deal, not just about how shitty and unethical the Tribune is, how shitty and unethical their corporate owners are, but worst of all, it tells me so much about how far the standards have fallen for our news media and how spineless readers have become in demanding actual professional, ethical reporting. This is maybe one of the ways that I'm just an old man. Maybe I am just too old-fashioned here, but I believe that readers and subjects of reporting should be able to trust that reporters are getting and sharing information from credible sources, even if that means jeopardizing a paper's ability to rush a story to print or make a few extra bucks on an over-the-top, salacious headline. And that's not just me saying that either. The Society of Professional Journalists echoes this exact sentiment.
What a nerd. Look at the nerd. Look at the nerd. Look at
But the Tribune, they chose to ignore all standards of professional journalism. They ran 3 straight days of hideous reporting about the troll story, all of which culminated in a Sunday edition, above-the-fold, expose-style hit piece that, in my view, is far better suited for the National Enquirer over a local paper of record. The story was packed with falsehoods, outright lies, contradictions, missing context up the wazoo, distortions, conjecture, and obviously unreliable sourcing. The trauma and ridicule that I experienced from these stories was immense and immediate, and unlike anything I have ever experienced before. And when everything began to unfold, I didn't know which way was up, how any of this could be happening, how anybody could believe I would do such a thing based on the entirety of my life's work in this town. I didn't know what the hell I was supposed to do next or who the fuck I could trust. So I did what felt right, but turned out was a miserable mistake that if you ever find yourself being canceled or mobbed, don't do what I did, okay? What I did was I hid. I retreated into the darkest and most lonely place I have ever known. And in that darkest of places, I would go on to engage in suicidal ideation and become emotionally numb and disconnected and disassociated with myself and my surroundings. I quickly found myself in financial ruin, jobless, and completely ostracized. Ostracized from the community that I'd lived in and loved in every way I could imagine since I was a little kid. I'd served this place through dozens of civic venues for my entire adult life. But all of that would be undone overnight, thanks to something fabricated by a shithead online troll and legitimized by a dumpster fire of a local newspaper. But that's just the beginning. It's especially difficult to get out of holes like that if you've been severely traumatized by the process, as I was, and worse if nobody believes you, and you're not a wealthy celebrity or whiny comedian or a conservative politician. It's all much, much worse. Because when an angry online mob or a click-driven, lazy reporter comes for the rich and famous, deservedly or not, there are many more options at their disposal in comparison to when something like that happens to a normal person, such as myself and probably you. Normal people don't have their own managers, their own entourage that can help advise them on how to deal with an incoming firestorm. Normal people can't hire PR coaches either that know exactly what the right thing to say and the right thing to do is in situations like this. No specialists that somebody like me can hire to help rehabilitate my image or regain my sanity when the smoke clears or get the truth out there. Normal people don't have blue check marks next to their names on Twitter or immediate access to their own giant platforms that can be used to tell their side of the story to millions of followers in an instant. And perhaps worst of all, normal people don't have the financial capacity to take on these costly legal fights in a court of law, which is where I wish I could bring this, and quite frankly, I wish that the jackass who accused me of such heinous things, I wish they would have had the balls to sue me, because if I would have found my way in court, I'm confident that I would have come out on top and they would have come out looking like the asshole that they are.
Did he just say?
Asshole.
Aye, he did.
I would have much preferred to be in a court of law, because in the court of public opinion, defenders, they're not offered due process. They're not offered any opportunity for restitution either. You can try all you want in the court of public opinion to prove your innocence, get people to listen to you, give you a fair shake, and fight your way back into the good graces of the public. But trust me, if this shit befalls you and you're a normal person, you are fucked. And by the way, if you think that there are any kinds of well-organized, righteous, restorative justice efforts offered to those whose lives have been shattered by the malpractice of online mob justice or just horrendously sloppy reporting, think again. I have looked high and low. That shit doesn't exist. Normal people, they simply get crushed and are rarely, if ever, heard from again. And everybody else just moves on. If you don't believe that I'm also entitled to justice,
Jesus Christ!
You're a worthless piece of shit.
I would like to show you how far I have gone to attempt to get my good name restored, and how little any of it has done. So when all this initially unfolded, my first thought at the very beginning was, let's see if the Tribune or their publisher, Lee Enterprises, which according to Wikipedia publishes 75 daily newspapers in 26 states, I'd like to see if that media conglomerate had any publicly available channels to register complaints for untruthful reporting.
Nope.
Or if either the Tribune or Lee Enterprises detailed through their website what sort of journalistic standards they adhere to.
Nope.
Unfortunately, I discovered that they just go on operating with no publicly accessible forms of accountability. In fact, it's not unique for a paper like the Tribune to just not publicize any sort of journalistic standards that they adhere to. Because if they did, then those would be standards that readers and subjects of their reporting could actually hold them to. But the fact that this is not unusual is not an excuse for the Tribune or their publisher. I'm bringing this up as a way to highlight two serious issues which are incredibly pervasive across many of the most widely consumed news outlets, and we're completely oblivious to it. And the gravity of these issues and how widespread they are should worry every consumer who cares an ounce about civil liberties and the fading art of ethical, accountable journalism.
Wow! The land of make-believe!
But that being said, absent any channels for accountability to pursue more directly with the paper or its publisher, over the last several years I have pursued every Hail Mary attempt I could think of at a little bit of help and maybe even a little justice. But such is the nature of Hail Marys. They don't usually work out, but sometimes they're all you got. Some of my earliest Hail Marys were tossed to local law enforcement. Knowing that I had nothing to hide and completely confident that I was being falsely accused, I filed a verbal and written report with the La Crosse Police Department. In fact, I wrote and provided an 8-page criminal complaint and gave an hour-plus long verbal report to the police department. At my request, I asked to speak with them, to give them all the information they need about this whole saga and about those who I firmly believed and still do were responsible and criminally liable. They then referred the matter to the district attorney, who then just ignored the PD's referral. They also ignored numerous phone calls I put into their office for updates on their review of this matter. I went to them and asked them to investigate and consider all the information I had. And I did all that while knowing that if any part of my written or verbal reports were found to be untruthful, I would be opening myself up for prosecution for committing a Class H felony for lying to the authorities. And so I had nothing to fear because no part of my report to them was untruthful. I mean, I'm no genius, but I'm also certainly not dumb enough to lie to the police. Unfortunately, one similarity between the court of public opinion and the American criminal justice system is that justice, quite clearly and quite often, is not evenly applied. Even when the evidence is overwhelming, and even when the consequences of inaction by the justice system is absolutely damning. So after concluding that local law enforcement didn't really give a shit, and knowing that I didn't have the financial means to make my case in a court of law myself, and feeling increasing desperation to find an avenue to set the record straight and tell my side of the story, I tried taking matters into my own hands. At one point, I went as far as to write a book, which in retrospect was really stupid because I would not recommend that those who are in a deeply traumatized state of mind, I don't suggest you write a book. At another point, after becoming unemployed and realizing that I had become virtually unemployable in the city I lived in, I applied for a job nearly 100 miles away. I hoped and figured that maybe if I put enough physical distance between me and the stories that the Tribune published about me, I thought maybe I could avoid having to uproot my family and move across the country, even if that meant having to drive 3 to 4 hours to and from work every day. So I applied for a job, and by some miracle, I got an interview, made the 1.5 to 2 hour drive to my would-be employer, and it was the best interview I've ever had. Until the very end, when the interview was nearly over, and the company's founder leaned in and said, "So there's one thing left we would like to talk to you about." And of course I knew exactly what was coming, and he continued to say, "Before you came in today, we Googled you." And it was at that moment I had a harsh realization that should concern all of us who live any parts of our lives online, which is virtually everybody. In today's culture, anyone can say anything that they want about you online. And if it's online, Google's got it, keeps it, and will make sure it's just a click away for the world to see forever. In other words, you can't outrun or ever escape the reach of Google. I tried. I know. It can't be done. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, I didn't get that job. And I can't help but wonder how many times have I applied for other jobs in recent years and got no callback, certainly no interview, because a prospective employer Googled me first and didn't even give me a chance to explain myself. Eventually, I even tried going back to the local press for first to a local TV station and then back to where it all began, the Tribune. Now again, I didn't go to the Tribune first because I obviously did not trust them. So I asked a highly respected local TV news anchor to have a meeting with me. We met for a couple hours, and after that they were in tears and said they wanted to do a multi-part series objectively covering my experience and investigate what really happened, which would have been a dream come true, because an objective analysis of what actually happened is all I've really wanted for years. I thought this was a turning point for me. I thought my nightmare was over. But the next day, this news anchor texted me and said that unfortunately, as much as they tried, the station manager wouldn't run the story. When I asked why, they said that their reasoning was that the story was over. Growing more desperate still, but still unwilling to give up, I asked to get coffee with a reporter from the Tribune. After the time we were finished with our coffees, she too agreed that she would like to pursue the story, but she did caution that the paper's editor, who approved the original bullshit story, was still the paper's editor and was likely to put kibosh on the idea. And of course at that my heart sank, because as I told her, I obviously did not trust this editor. And she replied, to my surprise, by saying that my distrust in him was not misplaced, because in fact she and most other reporters at that paper, at the Tribune, didn't trust him either. When I asked why, she said that among other things, it was primarily his profits first ideology and his ever-growing insistence that reporters, in her words, must sensationalize everything. That's interesting. Unfortunately, she said that due to his role, there was no way around him, which I hated but also understood. And that the only way to move forward was for me to present my case to him directly and ask him directly for corrections to the original stories, if not a full retraction, and request that a new series of follow-up stories be pursued and published. So, reluctantly, I sent the editor an email about the original defamatory story and offered supporting documentation for every correction I was asking for. Here's the email. He said that I could come in to talk with him. I could sit down in the paper's boardroom with him and chat with him in a few days. The last email of mine that he responded to closed with me saying this, said, "I want to make sure neither one of us feels rushed." His final reply was just 6 words. "I have 30 minutes, that's all." I'd be getting 30 minutes, and that was it. 30 minutes to unpack each of the heinous wrongs, lies, misrepresentations, and contradictions that packed every paragraph of the sleazy clickbait gossip pieces that he approved for publication. 30 minutes to appeal to the morality of somebody who obviously lacks any. 30 minutes to explain all of that and the immense damage that had been done to me and my family when he allowed one of his shithead reporters with a history of publishing negative, completely unsourced bullshit claims about me in the past to run a new hit piece on me that flew in the face of all logic and virtually every standard of professional journalism. Just 30 fucking minutes to convince his well-connected, powerful, unaccountable, stick-in-the-mud ass that despite there being no personal or professional or profit-driven upside, for him to reverse course and do the right thing, offer a full retraction and an editor's note because it's just the right thing to do. But as we've already established, doing the right thing and doing journalism the right way, that's not something modern media outlets give two shits about. Because quite frankly, it's not what consumers give a shit about either. But 30 minutes was all I got. The setup was obviously ridiculous and impossible. But again, it was a Hail Mary kind of moment. And I'd become sort of familiar with that. Like, well, better put on a brave face, pray to God, and give it my best attempt. As I prepared to sit across from him, this disgusting curmudgeon, who is the source of so much pain and loss that I can't even put it into words, speak the truth to him and hope that finally what's right and good would occur by some miracle. In that moment, I was overcome with emotional nausea and almost puked as I prepared to sit across from him. And when I did, I became physically ill, but did my best to compose myself. He probably didn't pick up on any of that because, let's be real, he obviously does not give a shit about other people and doing what's right. But holy shit, when I sat there, yeah, I felt like brave for a second, but most of all, I felt so incredibly small. Ashamed and embarrassed. Not for anything that I had done, but for what I was doing there by sitting there with him. Here I was, knowing my truth, knowing the truth, and knowing the paper's lies, which were thereby his. But nevertheless, here I was, sitting right there, hoping for the best, but honestly prepared for the worst. And in the least surprising move in this whole story, the Tribune's editor treated me with predictable hostility and dismissiveness. In fact, he didn't even once address any of the long list of inaccuracies or lies or contradictions that I carefully laid out for him in writing. He didn't address any of the supporting evidence I offered either. Instead, rather than discussing any of that, the whole fucking reason for our meeting, he chose instead to launch into a diatribe and a line of questioning about why wait so long if things were really so bad. Anyone who has experienced significant trauma or knows someone who has almost certainly heard questions like those before. Why'd you wait so long? Why are we just hearing about it now? If you've been through anything like this, you know how those kinds of questions tear at your soul. I was literally sitting there asking, begging, the person who pulled the trigger on the most traumatic experience of my entire life. I was begging for just a little bit of pity and fairness. I got none. Jack squat. Instead, he coldly said, much like the TV station manager, that I had my chance, and concluded by saying, "We're not changing anything. Here's the door." A few days after that, I went onto Medium and I published my own version of the original story with all the appropriate corrections, context, and clarifications to the original story. And you can read that in the description below. There is a link to that. But even in publishing that, I learned something very sad. I spent days writing that, rounding up supporting evidence, creating graphics to accompany the story and make it more easy to understand. And the response from my hometown, which I gave my heart and soul for my entire adult life, they did not give a shit. They didn't want to read it. Why? Because they already got what they wanted. The average Joe and Jane in town got to enjoy a classic build-em-up, tear-em-down story. The paper and their publisher got to profit off the destruction of my reputation and my life. The lowlife weasel who authored the story soon went on to advance his career by finally managing to leave the small-town Tribune for the big leagues as a reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal, who, of course, also is, of course, owned by Lee Enterprises. And we can't forget, last but not least, the many thousands of woke scolds that really got their chance to show how much justice and truth matters. Fuck you too. And what did I get? A YouTube video. Yeah, I got jack shit. But that doesn't matter to the locals. It doesn't matter to the paper, to the author of the story, to the douche canoe that made the original defamatory post, or the fossil that approved the story for publication. Didn't matter to any of them. I hope people might care elsewhere. I hope that sharing my story might encourage others like me to come forward to demand and create change in our culture and media landscape. I hope that newsrooms will re-examine their editorial controls and how they engage with online mobs and trolls. I hope that newsrooms will move away from business models that incentivize sensationalism and rely on click-based revenue generation, because that all inevitably leads to the worst kinds of reporting. And I hope too that readers will do their part not to feed news outlets that continue to deal in this sort of sloppy, scummy, destructive journalism. I hope people will realize that online mob justice is no longer a phenomenon being experienced solely by the rich and famous, who generally can handle it and be just fine. I honestly don't know what to call experiences like mine. I don't know if I should call it mobbing or cancel culture or recreational outrage, but I certainly know that it wasn't okay, and if that becomes synonymous with what it means to be a leftist, the left is screwed. I hope people start to see how utterly devastating online mob justice is and how enduring the devastation tends to be, and how utterly inhumane, arbitrary, and fundamentally unjust many instances of online mob justice or cancel culture or whatever you want to call it often is. And I hope that the next time any of us see an online mob forming, that we'll take a step back, reconsider joining in, and maybe even consider being the one person courageous enough to stand by the side of somebody who is being shown no mercy.